and good afternoon. I'll stick to the Miami time, Florida time. You might be in different time zones, but whatever is the time, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And on behalf of the Society, Production and Operations Management Society, I welcome you all to the first webinar, seminar, whatever you want to call it, which has been organized by Bala Shetty. And thank you, Bala, for taking this lead. Bala, as you know, is our Vice President for Education. And we discussed this seminar, and we thought that it will be good to bring our doctoral students together and talk to them and bring a distinguished panel, which Bala will introduce to this seminar, so they can share their experiences with the doctoral students. And remember, these doctoral students are our future leaders in our discipline. And they will take up the positions in academia, they will be involved in the society, move the society along. And we have a series of 3 seminars. And I'm sure this seminar will be very successful. So we would like to make it a continuing event, particularly given the interest in the online sessions. Our students will benefit from this. And we do have a doctoral consortium that we organize in our annual conferences. But this is a one-time event, once in a year. But our students, they need more feedback, more mentoring from the distinguished speaker, distinguished faculty in our discipline. And the seminar will also bring us closer to our members. Doctoral student, this seminar is one part of the series. There will be other themes on which we will organize such sessions. So welcome again, and over to you, Bala.
Well, thank you, Sushil. Appreciate your support. Thank you. And I want to give a little bit of background about this. This past year, I managed faculty recruiting at Mace Business School. We had 250 applications for 3 positions. And there was such a variance in terms of candidates' experience, how they presented themselves, how they managed the recruiting process. So I discovered that some schools do a great job in mentoring students, not just on research and teaching, but how to put the best foot forward as they go to the recruiting process. And some students had no idea. So I thought this would be a great service from POMS to help these students, provide some insights, tell them what works, what doesn't work from our perspective. So I scheduled a series of a series with 3 workshops with different themes. Today's theme is essentially, how do you put your best foot forward initially? How do you prepare your dossier? How do you prepare your resume? What is the search process is like? So I'm privileged to welcome our distinguished panel. You couldn't have asked for a better group of people to guide our PhD students through this process. Dr. Tang, I think Professor Tang needs no introduction. Professor Tang is a distinguished professor at UCLA. He's a fellow of POMS, MSOM, and Informs. He was the editor-in-chief for MSOM. He is a seminal scholar, and I bet every one of us at one point in our career as a beneficiary of his work. So Professor, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Anandi, I'm going in a random order. Dr. Anandi Bharatwaj, she is Vice Dean for Faculty at Emory University. Anand is also a senior editor, department editor for management science. She was associate editor of MISQ. She is a senior editor for ISR as well. Anandi got her PhD from a great school in Texas, Texas A&M University, and I was privileged to be her professor such a long time ago. So Anandi, great to have you with us. Thank you for joining. Brian, wonderful to have you with us again. Professor Tomlin needs no introduction. He got his PhD at MIT. He's on the faculty at North Carolina for a few years, and he's at Dartmouth in the last few years. He was a department editor for MSOM, and a long list of pretty significant accolades in our field. So Brian, so thank you so much. You probably have a better weather in Hanover than us in Texas today, right?
Given I'm from Ireland, yeah, hot weather doesn't suit me. So I would find Texas summers difficult given I'm from Ireland.
Oh, yes. We are getting used to it. It says, but finally, last but not least, my friend Morgan Swink. Morgan and I went to school together many, many years ago. Morgan got his undergraduate from SMU, graduate degree from University of Dallas, a PhD from Indiana. Morgan served on the faculty at Indiana, Michigan State, and finally, like all Texans, he came back to Texas, and he's a distinguished professor at TCU. So all of you, thank you so much. The way to manage this attendees, if you have questions, just put it on chat. Rakesh and Mayuk will help us I can read the question to our panel members, but I'll start the conversation going. I think I think we can add, subtract questions. We have the freedom to handle it however we want, but I will open our conversation. So I want to ask Professor Tang, since he's our most senior scholar here, give us some sense of what is a good dossier, because this is when the interview process starts, right? Students start sending resumes, research statements, teaching statements. Give us some sense of what you consider a good dossier and how would PhD students go about putting that together?
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And I'm delighted to be here. And I understand that this is a very difficult, challenging period of time. And I want to thank our panelists as well as our participants. I think that we can really learn through each other's comments, and hopefully you may find it useful. Now, in terms of dossier, time has changed. We know that. Well, right now, I think that besides the short dossier, usually maybe 1 or 2 pages, try to highlight what you do, right? So that's standard. And also the research statement, the self statement, I would suggest don't make it too long. Some of the candidates, they make it like a paper itself, 20-some pages. No one is going to read it, to be honest with you. So I think that you need to figure how to promote yourself. That means that can you use maybe 2 or 3 pages to describe who you are? And also in terms of your passion, your research passion. You don't need to summarize the entire paper using a few pages. Again, no one's going to read it. So I think they say, well, I'm passionate about X. Therefore, I study this topic. And this topic only represents the starting part of my journey. So I am inspired to do X, Y, Z, and this is what I've done in my thesis, and I'll continue to do ABC. So that's what we want to know. They want to know you as a person, right? In terms of your passion about teaching, research, and also that now many universities, they also require statements about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So maybe make some comments about that as well, right? So that's point number 1. Now, the other one is I also want to add one element about your online presence, right? Because time is different now. So I think that I hope that all of you have your own websites. That is because that will provide more information. Then your dossier says, well, this is a high level summary of what I do, but then if you want more details, go to my website. People expect that. Then also the other one would be, can you do something on LinkedIn? Because many professors are on LinkedIn as well. Then you can link them up even before anything, because that is your persona online, because people do check that, right? So try to see if you have some blogs, use some blogs to summarize a little bit of your work. It's okay. When you're young, do some promotion is perfectly fine because you're looking for a job, right? So maybe some of your papers say, hey, I got this paper submitted. This is what we do. Try to make it simple but short, maybe just one page, maybe some graphics to explain the idea behind it. It's like your elevator pitch, right? Make it short. So I think that with the supplement your printed dossier with your online presence and your website, I think that would be a good start. I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
I'm going to go to you. What works in your experience? What didn't work? And I also, when I picked the panels, I wanted a mix of private versus public schools. And I think each one of you have both experience in private as well as public schools. So you can give perspective from a private school perspective, a little different than public schools. So Anandi, what do you want to add to Professor Tang's some suggestions?
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Bala. Thank you for having me on this panel. Really excited to be here and to meet all of you virtually. I want to just preface my remarks by saying, this is an exciting time for all of you. You are at the cusp of starting and entering a new career that you've dreamed of and have worked really tirelessly for at least the last 5 to 6 years, maybe much longer, right? And I expect this year to be both anxious and exhilarating, maybe tiring and frustrating at the same time. And yet, I hope it's filled with optimism and hope. And you might feel all of these emotions simultaneously, sometimes in quick succession. Take a deep breath. This is not uncommon. I was thinking of, about I'm going to date myself here, more than 25 years ago when I was in the job market. And we, Bala knows, my husband and I, we were both academics and trying to be in the same job in the same year. And so I'm sure we'll get to some of those. There might be special other considerations, some of you looking for, even if they are not a fellow academic, looking for another job in a same city and so forth. So each of us, the situation is unique. But remember, at the end of the process, your job is to land a good placement for you. And, and the other thing I often hear from students is that they fret about the market, right? Bala talked about receiving 250 applications for 3 positions. And those of us here on the panel, we've been here for more than 2 decades, 3 decades sometimes, and we've seen many cycles. Academic job market cycles tend to be sometimes boom and bust cycles, right? So sometimes there are more jobs per person and sometimes a lot fewer jobs per person. But my advice to students often is don't fret about things that you don't control. You don't control the job market. It is what it is. But what you can control is how well prepared you are for the market that exists, right? So putting your best foot forward, as Bala described, is critical. And, and there are several elements to it. And, Bala alluded to the variance that he saw among the 250 applications. And Professor Tang just talked about sort of the first, your identity statement or your cover letter. And we have definitely over the years seen several samples of this. The good ones tend to be short, I would say, a couple of pages, agree absolutely with what Professor Tang said, but really brings out what is unique about you, your work, the success that you've had in the PhD program. And really speaks to, because think about it, your packet is the first thing people see you, right? If I'm interested in the theoretical construct of you, think of your packet as the operationalization of that construct, right? Of who you are. And so that's my first encounter with the candidate. And I'm looking to see several things. And I know it's hard to bring out your own personal passion, but do customize your cover letter and your identity statement to the school that you're applying for, right? granted, you're going to be applying for, many schools, quite not uncommon for people to apply 2025 and sometimes even more. But do take the time to go to the school's website, to read their position statement carefully, see what it is that the school's looking for. And I'm sure you've all done some work, something that speaks to the unique requirements of those schools. So the good cover letters are often where the candidate has taken the time to connect themselves to the work that they have done, whether it's research, teaching, service-related work, even sometimes as a PhD student, to what the school's looking for, right? So definitely try and make that connection. Also keep, in your full packet, you will, beyond your identity statement, schools ask for your complete CV, teachings, and it depends on when they may want all of these, but be ready with a research statement and a teaching statement, right? So all of these are important elements of representing who you are. And again, we've seen variance in quality, and sometimes it's just the simple things, right? Just being sloppy about some things, that not really knowing, or even sometimes having a wrong position mentioned in the cover letter, or a wrong department chair name mentioned in the cover letter. We know you're trying to get lots of things done this year, right? Along with trying to complete your dissertation, you're applying to the job market. So, we get all that. But at the same time, I think it is extremely critical that you are just not sloppy about this, and take the time to both think about, what is the school statement and mission, going to their website, looking at the dean's statement, looking at the chair's position description. All of this will help you definitely write a better cover letter than just a standard template. And we can smell that very easily, right? Is this person just sending a standard template letter that they are sending to every other school, or has that person really taken the time to see how they are, how they would fit with the job and the school that they're applying for? So I'm going to also stop here. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more detailed question about each of the artifacts that go into your packet, and we can get to that.
So I'm going to go to Professor Tomlin. Brian, so what is a most desirable dossier in your view, in your experience?
Yeah, I take a step back first. Well, again, congratulations to everyone to reaching this point in their PhD. I want to mention one thing. I was a little bit different. I didn't actually go into academia right after my PhD. So I was in industry for a few years after my PhD before I moved back to academia. I'm not saying that's an easy transition back, but it is empirically a possible transition back. And I wanted to mention that. It's also, I think, important to understand the funnel in recruiting, and therefore the role the dossier has in that initial part of the funnel. So traditionally, I'm going to say things I'm hoping are changed somewhat, but traditionally, there'd be a search committee, possibly the whole department, who'd review the dossiers and decide who to have an interview with at Decision Sciences, at Informs, whatever the relevant conference would be. And then after the conference, come back and decide who to have flyouts and then who to make an offer to. And in many ways, the role of the dossier is to make sure you get through that first screening, that you get in front of the faculty and have an interview. I hope that now that we're all forced to be familiar with Zoom in the past 18 months, that maybe that schools will actually widen out the number of people they have that sort of first touch with, that first interview with. And so it isn't so much tied to the 2 days at a conference, we're trying to cram everybody in. That's a hope. I don't know if that will happen, but hopefully it'll happen. And I agree with everything that's been said so far by Chris and about the dossier, especially the notion of it being genuine that Chris said, it's sort of speaking to the school, etc. A couple things I'd add to it. One is, be careful in doing that not to portray yourself as being too narrow, especially when it comes to teaching. You don't know unless the school says specifically they're looking for this course, which is unlikely. You don't know where their pressure points they feel as to what kind of course they're trying to staff. So demonstrating a willingness and a breadth in your teaching, I think it is important. Research papers by definition will be somewhat narrow, but putting it in the context of a broader theme, I think is also going to be very, very, very helpful. But make it specific to the Tuck School, different to when I was at UNC. Tuck School is essentially the single degree program where it's a full-time MBA program. So part of our thinking will be, can we imagine this person stepping into an MBA class in the first year? That's not the same sort of screening other schools will do, where there's undergraduate or master's in management programs where it's not sort of that kind of thinking. But again, I think that genuineness, that excitement for the school, but making sure you're somewhat sort of broad. The next thing I say is really, really tactical. A lot of schools now use Interfolio as the sort of the mechanism that which you apply. Interfolio has some strengths and has some weaknesses. One of the frustrations that we have found with Interfolio is depending on how you put in your application, it might list you as your undergrad institution, not as your PhD institution. Because if you only put your terminal degree in, it'll filter you as your undergrad institution. So I'll see some people, they'll put A, B, D, they'll do something to make sure that the Interfolio filter captures their current institution. And why is that important? Schools tend to have had success with a certain subset of schools out there. They're going to pay a bit more attention, frankly, to the schools they've had success with. They will look at all the applications, but their eyes might land more on certain institutions than other institutions when they're looking through 250 applications. So that's the thing I'd add. And Chris mentioned DEI also. A lot of schools now do have a statement around DEI, and so put some thought into that. That can be easier or more difficult depending on your background, frankly, but do put some thought into it.
Well, thank you, Brian. Morgan, I'm sure you have something to add on what our colleagues have already stated. You've been part of great public schools, great private schools. So what do you have to say, Morgan?
Well, thanks, Val, and thanks also for me for the chance to be part of this discussion. And I'm excited. I look at the numbers, and we must have every PhD student in the whole world on this session. I didn't know there were so many PhD students in our discipline, but congratulations to all of you for making it this far, and in advance for where you're going to go next. So I guess I have a little bit to add. I think most of the big issues regarding the dossier and the research statement, that kind of stuff, have been made. My colleagues have done a good job covering those key points. I guess I would revisit a bit, what Anandi and Brian referred to a little bit in terms of tailoring your resume or your CV. I do think that's a great idea. You absolutely want to be genuine and not misrepresent yourself, but at the same time, any intelligence that you can develop around the particular school that you're applying to. And of course, you can go to their website and all that stuff. But I would encourage you to look at the faculty publication records and understand what they're about. Talk to your advisor. A lot of times, we all know each other. There's a small world, So try to learn as much as you can about the school, about the faculty, and about the position. And you could even, depending on how, if you have some kind of connection to parlay, reach out to one of the faculty or the department chair and ask a little bit more about the position. And then just try to make connections wherever you can. Again, you want to present who you are, but if there's some way to make connections between your research interests and those of the current faculty, to do that within your research statement, or even the little short paragraph that you put into your CV that communicates your research interests, that's a great thing to do. And then in terms of the public-private distinction, Brian referred to this. We're more of a teacher-scholar school here at TCU. I mean, we're very interested in research as probably the primary selection criteria, but teaching is very important, and especially graduate level teaching is very important. So I would encourage you to put, just like you might put a short couple of sentences regarding your research interests. Say something about teaching on your CV. Again, try to be as general as possible, but it's an interesting phenomenon in our world. Most lines, positions are justified because of teaching needs, but then the selection is usually driven by research. So you do need to be able to represent, both of those interests when you're talking to the department. So it's good to kind of find out, what is it that they're looking for and how to communicate that. I'll stop there and we can talk more about the other phases of the process as we go forward.
Thanks, Morgan. I'm going to ask the next question. I gathered these questions from PhD students because I was a PhD student, 36 years ago. So I have no idea. World PhD students have changed quite a bit. The next question about the reference letters. The letters that we ask a reference to write. Professor Tang, I'm going to start with you, but the panel members feel free to chime in. We don't need to go in this order. Is it a good idea to send reference letters if the schools don't ask for it? What is the appropriate time to send those letters? And whom should those letters be written by? So, that's kind of three-part question. So if Professor Tang, if you would address the appropriateness of sending the letters, the content of the letters, and whether, they should send the letters without the schools soliciting those letters. So I'll start with you, sir.
Thank you very much, Bala. Well, I think that maybe I would like to take a step back before sending out the letter. Mm-hmm. So I want to follow on Brian's comments earlier on. He made a comment that to a certain extent, it is quite true that certain schools, they may focus on a certain set of candidates from certain schools. Now, how do we know that? You only need to look at the profile of different schools, then you can tell the type of schools or the type of research they tend to focus on. Now, then, I don't want our students to think about, they discriminate against me. It's not you. Is the fit. Think about is a fit, right? Then I think that before you just do the mass emailing, mass sending, I would say that it's actually no use. It was just in the trash box, right? So I think that you need to do some homework to see that who you are, what you identify with, and whether the school is actually have a good match or have some interest in your line of research and teaching. So start with that first. Once you identify a good set of school that you can identify with, and they can identify with you, then you can start in terms of about sending out letters, right? Now, then Bala's question is who do you send it to? Of course, there's a regular channel. You can, all schools virtually have the website. You can submit if their job opening. Now, then I think that some schools have the interfolio. Then in the case, it's just one set of letters will go, right? Now, then the next question, Bala said, who should write the reference letters? Then, of course, usually is your thesis advisor, right? Now, but then what if you don't get along with your thesis advisor? It can happen, all right? Then in the case, you may want to find, do you have allies? Now, if you're no allies, then you're in trouble. That means you cannot get along with your thesis advisor, no allies. Then the case, maybe the problem is you, not your thesis advisor. Think about it, right? So you need some allies. Either it could be your co-authors, could be your other professors, someone who actually can identify with you, can say something about you. They say, well, I can describe this person as such, right? So I think that is also need to become as genuine in describe this person's capability, talents, and experience and passion, right? So I think you need to identify the right people to describe who you are, because what we're looking for is that we don't know you. Can we actually, through these letters, get a sense who you are, right? So I think that is important. Then the question is when? When should you send it? Well, for the school to have openings, you send it through the regular channels. If you want to nudge a little bit, maybe you ask your advisors to send it to the key contacts. Could be the department head or someone. Just one letter, just let go. Don't be too pushy. If you push everyone, that could backfire, right? So that's my take. Then I think that is all I can think of. Well, I'm sure that other panelists have many other advice to offer. I'll stop here.
Let's add, I agree with what Chris said there. And if I go back to that fit aspect, and I think of when is it useful for an advisor or an ally to send to make me or someone else in the department aware of their student? It's if the fit's not an obvious fit. And so they might think, you might not look at this person, but you really should look at this person. And that's where, an email from a colleague at a different university who has a student or is aware of a student, that's likely to get, search committee's attention much more than an email from the student, is what I would say.
Yeah. One thing I would add very quickly is for all of us who've written these kinds of letters, we know that it takes time to write a quality letter, and it's not uncommon for us to take 3 to 4 hours to really write a good letter. So don't just assume that, once you've asked your advisor and maybe your committee members or another faculty that knows your work, and they've said, yes, they'll write a letter, don't assume that, they'll remember everything about you, all the work you've done, and be able to write this perfect letter and send it across, right? So be sure to follow up. Lots of times the letter writers will ask you for talking points. Don't be shy about those talking points. The problem is I might know you well, but I don't remember that, oh, you taught this course and got excellent ratings, or you got this, other paper that you published outside of your core dissertation work. Even if I'm your thesis advisor, I might not remember everything that you have done. And sometimes highlighting some of those in the letters serve very good purpose as well. So don't be shy about providing the talking points to the people that have agreed to write letters for you. Do follow up with them, make sure that they have written it. And also sometimes schools will ask for, I think as both Professor Tang and Brian alluded to, sometimes schools may ask letter writers to send the letters directly to them. Sometimes they will ask the candidate to get it and include it in the packet. So especially if the letter writers are sending the letters directly, just follow up and make sure that they actually have sent the letter. So that is something that is on you as the job seeker to make sure that your packet's complete and has gone in. I think the question also asked about numbers. So how many? 2 to 3 is not uncommon. 5 or 6, I would say, is an overkill. And again, when you think of the 2 to 3 letter writers, see if you can get them to emphasize different strengths across their letters so all your strengths come up. It's, sometimes your advisor, of course, your primary advisor, it's always good to get a letter from your primary advisor, because not having a letter from your advisor sends a signal, right? Also to the committee. People are also worried then, is this person going to finish their dissertation if their advisor is not really in support of the candidate and so on. So always a great idea to include a letter from your primary advisor. And they may speak, and largely the expectation is that that letter will really communicate the strength of your dissertation, the importance of it, the practical significance, the theoretical contributions, whatever it is, right? The key highlights of why your work is so important and so on. But they may not, again, each of these letters shouldn't be too long, and they may not have the space and the time to emphasize everything else. So if you can get a third letter that talks more to your, your teaching strengths, the things that you have done, other things that you have done in your PhD program. So across the 2 or 3 letters that you're sending, make sure that, the school gets a good sense of all your research and your teaching strengths. And, somebody mentioned DEI. Yes, almost all schools are looking for some evidence now that you've at least thought about these issues. You may not have had the power or the control within your PhD program to really, sort of influence many of these activities in the school. But the question is, have you done anything? For example, even if it could have been a simple thing like you organized a PhD student seminar series, an informal brown bag within your department or within your school, and you brought together students from other disciplines, or you reached out to allied discipline, PhD students in allied disciplines, whether it's economics or sociology or psychology or whatever it is. Think of those examples that you may have done that showed initiative, that showed that you were a person that reaches out to other people and have brought in. So, I'm sure there's plenty of things that you have done over the, 4 or 5 years that you've been in your program. It's a question of trying to present all of that in a way that people see the breadth of your work and your contributions over this period.
Hey, Morgan, anything to add to the letters, Morgan? I saw you already responded to participant, but if you would please add something.
Yeah, well, someone in the chat, I think is saying, anticipated the comment I was going to make, and that is, absolutely provide talking points, but make sure that you give different talking points, or at least make your different letter writers aware. I've seen this happen before. You get 3 recommendations or 2 from different faculty in the department. They're identical, almost identical. And you could tell the student basically wrote it for them and sent it in. And that obviously sends a bad message. So try to avoid that situation. I think the other part of the question, I don't know if you want to just address this, is if the school doesn't ask for letters, do you send them anyway? I think most schools do ask. Sometimes they may just ask for reference, contacts, but I don't see any harm in sending them. On the other hand, well, if you feel like the recommendations are going to be strong, if they're going to be helpful to you, then by all means send them. I would say send them, even if they're not asked for. And by strong, I mean that they're going to be complimentary or favorable. And also, if the writers themselves are have stature, recognizable figures in the field, I think that carries some weight. So, use that resource if you have it.
Hey, Morgan,
Bala, if I may, very quickly, just one other point also that I think of adding is that sometimes when you ask somebody for a letter, you may get a very lukewarm response, right? I think it's important to pay attention to that signal as well, right? So it may be better to just get 2 strong letters rather than 3, and the third letter is weak or very lukewarm. That may not really bolster your case so much. So do pay attention to that. It certainly has to come across. I mean, I think the person that's writing a letter should know you pretty well, should have known your work, or at least some aspect of your work quite well. And I completely agree with Morgan's remark that, if 2 or 3 people are just saying the same things, and if it just comes across as not being genuine or written by somebody that really didn't know you at all very well and have just responded very perfunctorily to your request, that actually can be a negative signal sometimes.
Thanks, Anandi. I have questions on chat, but I want a leading question about the process of evaluation. Was a little touch upon once they get the dossier, and the process varies from school to school. I'm sure we have a very different process at Mace Business School than at TCU or Dartmouth or Emory. Give us a sense of what the process looks like, because what I've noticed is after they send the application dossier, candidates are understandably very anxious. They're always wondering when we're going to hear from it. Sometimes Interfolio does not respond at all. I mean, sometimes, when you have 250 applications, and I'm guilty of that too. And once I just want to get through the process, identify the candidates, bring them to the campus. In the process, I forgot to let them know that, they were not in the pool. And I did later once the process was concluded. So I want the panel to give a sense of what is the process like, and when is the appropriate time to contact the school about the process, because schools don't like to be hounded by 250 applicants. So is there a right time to contact the schools and ask them? That's one question. Second question was, how is the process different for senior experienced assistant professors than just the new PhDs? Because I have a couple of questions on that. If the panel members can talk about, what senior assistant professors, how they should present their case as opposed to the new PhD. So it's a long list of questions. So I'm going to go let the panels hand that. Professor Tang, I'm always going to you first, sir.
Okay, let me be the guinea pig. It's all right. It's the oldest ones will be always the guinea pig. Well, first of all, I think that I want to clarify that I think the process, it varies from school to school, right? So I do not know other schools, but I can describe the process at UCLA. Now, in our school, in particular in my departments, we are extremely democratic. We actually, because let's say for myself and also our senior colleagues in my group, we delegate everything to the younger generation. Here's why. Because we're close to retirement, whoever we hire will not affect us, but it could affect the group dynamics for the people who need to work with. So basically that we really come in, our opinion come in later on. The first screening process, everything is done by a junior committee because they have the vested interest to find a good colleagues because they would work with them for a longer period of time. So that's what we do. So then in that case, once you narrow it down, then someone like myself would interject, hey, this it seems it could be a good fit, maybe a better trend. It's more on the minor touch-ups, but I think the bulk of the work is done by our junior colleagues. So that's point number one. Point number two is that, yes, you're right, because that's when you receive hundreds of applications, our system does not give you the information about the process. We only acknowledge that you have submitted your package. After that, it becomes a black box. Yes, there's no easy way out to explain that. So until that is when the candidate is selected for interviews or flyouts, then in the case that they can, then we have more correspondence. For those who are not selected, we don't have a clear, simple process. The information system does not have that easy capability, right? So I think that I also want to add a point at UCLA, because I think we're the public university, DEI is a very critical issue. So even when we select the, narrow down the list, we have to submit to central campus to get approved, to make sure that our candidate pool is diverse enough, and also our finalist pool is also diverse enough. And they have to approve the list before we can actually finalize our list for interviews. So in that case, we have an extra step. So the central campus is very involved to ensure we have this DEI components in our selection process. I stop here.
Brian, you want to address a little bit about process, when it's appropriate to contact the schools and so on and so forth?
So I think exactly as Chris said, it's going to vary from school to school and from department to department, to be honest. Partly depending on the size of the department, how many people's eyes are going to be involved in recruiting. So I will describe it into the Ops and Management Science group here at Tuck. We're a relatively small group, 6 or 7 people, so certainly smaller than Chris's group at UCLA. So normally there'd be 1 or 2 folks who would, create a very, very large list, I would say, to be sort of then screened down to who we might do that first sort of interview with, traditionally at some fall conference, for example, in POMS. But that would purposely be a large list so we don't miss out on people that could be good. And then that list would be shared with the rest of the group, and we will have a meeting where we'll discuss who we want to interview. But think back to Sport Obermeyer case. Those in the Sport Obermeyer case, we purposely task ourselves to come up with our individual sort of thoughts before the meeting to try and avoid that sort of groupthink within the meeting. And then we'll have a discussion in the meeting about some notion of who do you want to interview. Again, back to my earlier comment, I hope in a Zoom world that the number of folks we interview can expand compared to the past when it was sort of in person at a conference. And I would say, in many ways, this is true in any kind of job, academic, non-academic, you kind of want someone to be excited about you. If no one's excited about you, it's a little bit difficult. So that's the process up to that point, I would say. A couple of questions so the question about how much emphasis should be given to pre-PhD industry work. I would say definitely emphasize it, because people tend to have this association. If you've worked, you're more likely to be able to relate to students in the classroom. So I think if you have that pre-PhD work experience, by all means emphasize it. The associate professor question by you raised, this is always an interesting one. If you're if the ad says mid-level hires, some people will reveal themselves and will actually apply. Some folks don't want to apply directly, and they'll send feelers out to schools saying, well, I might be interested in moving. Would you be interested if I might be interested in moving? So there tends to be an additional separate channel for mid-level hires also, is what I would say.
Anandi, what's in terms of process? I think your Emory process is probably very similar to Brian's and TCU's. What is the process like, and when would be the proper time for applicants to reach out and ask about it, provide information? Because I recall getting a lot of emails as to where we are in the process, so something, I think, I'm sure it would be something good for our attendees to know.
Right. Yeah, so our process is similar as well. We are, a combined area. We call ourselves areas and not departments of both information systems and operations management. And that's another thing also to pay attention to, because many times operations management may exist as a standalone department or group, but may also coexist with another discipline in its structure. And the reason I mentioned this as important to sort of know is more than your packet, and very quickly I'll talk about, sometimes that trips people up when they come to present their work, because you're going to have, if you're called for a job interview, you're going to have people in your job talk that span or from primarily other academic disciplines. So one thing to know is, and we talked about this earlier, know where you're applying to and who are the people there. So, but that's a later step to know who your audience is going to be if you do get invited for a job talk. But to Bala's question about, when in the process will candidates be notified? We usually, because we've got two sub-disciplines, we first form a search committee of, members, 3 to 4 faculty members from the primary area. If we're looking for an ops person, 3 to 4 members will form the search committee, and their job is to screen all the applications and come up with a short list, right? So before the search committee is formed, there is a discussion with the larger faculty about sort of who will be in the search committee, and then what are the key criteria, what are we looking for, in terms of research, in terms of teaching, at least a broad idea as to what kinds of strengths we want and so on. So there is some common agreement and understanding about that. And then the committee also has to go through an anti-bias training, and there are several steps first for the committee to be ready to start processing the application. So once all that happens, they start to process the applications and the shortlist. We don't usually, and I think this may be a reason why candidates don't, if they don't make the cut, they don't hear right away, because part of the reason is also, I think faculty don't like to sort of close off the other options early on. We may have to go back to the pool to see, is there somebody that we missed in our first screening, or sometimes the candidates that we selected might not be available. They've already gotten other offers. So for all those reasons, we don't like to sort of preemptively, unless we know very clearly that there's just no fit, or for other reasons, there might be some that we've screened out. But for a lot of the other candidates, we may keep them in the pool for a longer time. And that's the reason you might not hear right away, even if you're not, if you haven't been selected in the first round. In terms of reaching out, that's always sort of delicate. You don't want to badger a search committee chair or a department chair. And that's why your network of alumni, other friends can come in handy as well. You can send a quick note to someone in the department if you know them personally or through another alumni in that school or, that's in the department. Hey, can you, where are you in the search process? That might work a little bit better if you have those links. Or maybe your advisor or somebody that your faculty member can reach out on your behalf and find out a bit about where they are in the process. It's you don't want to sort of keep feel like you're going after very frequently and keep checking the process, because that never really works well. So yeah, I think I wouldn't. That would be my recommendation, is to not reach out too often, to find out where you are in the process, and you will hear about it one way or the other.
Morgan, one of the questions on chat is schools. Last year we all did on Zoom, right? Most of us, everything, all the interviews, everything took place on Zoom. Which had some advantages and some disadvantages. So we saved a lot of money from alcohol and meals, right? But then we really didn't get to experience our candidates as well as in person. What is your sense for this year? Is it going to be on Zoom again, or it's going to be in person, a combination? So I'm assuming panel members have some sense of what the process might be again this year. Morgan, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I guess I can brag about us a little bit. We were actually doing this even before the pandemic. We were using Zoom or Skype or other ways to pre-interview candidates. It's not a replacement at all for the face-to-face interviews that you could have at conferences. And of course, the conference also offers the opportunity to watch usually a candidate present. Kind of in the crowd, like a scout or something. So I don't think Zoom will replace conference interviews or conference interactions. It certainly won't replace on-campus visits, but it's going to be part of that funnel that Brian talked about. I think it's going to be an important part of that front end funnel, and hopefully will give us all a chance to talk to more potential candidates, because there is this problem. Limited information, right? When you're just going on a piece of paper, you're looking at a person's resume, it's just very easy to miss what we'd call sleepers, people who might be great fits, but they just don't present well on paper, or something's missing, some piece of information is missing. So we're excited about using that medium as a way. It is, it's more labor intensive, but that's why we have committees, and our process is very similar to the three schools I've taught at, all similar process. We have a subcommittee within the department who representative of some stakeholders, whether that's content related or program related. And then one of those persons is the chair of the committee, a faculty member, and they try to winnow the overall set down to what they consider an acceptable short list, and then they meet with the faculty, et cetera. We do also have I didn't know TCU was so progressive, but we have a really great information system. It's called iGreentree, and the chair of the committee is required to go in and update the status of each applicant. I don't know if it's weekly or bi-weekly, but any candidate can go and log on, and very quickly the folks who are not going to make the cut are labeled, not selected. And they know, and we have certain timeframes that we're required to make those kinds of decisions. Another thing that you might keep in mind, I don't know if you're aware of this, but once a job is posted, we cannot interview anyone for a certain amount of time. That's like 30 days or longer. And I don't know if that's an EEO requirement or that's a TCU thing, but there are those kinds of restrictions too that sometimes make the process longer. So don't worry if you don't hear back, right away.
Thank you, Morgan. Brian, what's you guys going Zoom again this year, or it's going to be mixed? Any sense of what might be, in what direction you might be going this year?
The ops group isn't going to be hiring this year, so I can't comment what the ops group is going to be doing. I think it's going to depend an awful lot on attendance at conferences. So what faculty decide about whether they're going to be attending conference in person or not. So I would imagine it's going to be a combination this year, to be honest. Probably true for most schools.
One of the questions I see on this question has come up several times as to the senior hires, senior assistant professor hires, advanced candidates in the market, and how do they present their case differently than a rookie? And I think we have on the chat the same question again. Can you provide some insights, some guidance to those who might be in the market? And I know there are some here who are on the advanced level, they're advanced assistant professor, perhaps trying to switch to another institution, so on and so forth. So Professor Tang, you want to take that?
My response would be rather short. At UCLA, I think that for some reasons, maybe historical reasons or the culture of a group, our preference is mainly focused on PhD candidates, fresh PhDs. I think partly, I think it's the past history, but that is our tradition. So far, we have not hired anyone with senior assistants, but Brian has a lot of experience on that.
Yeah, so
right?
Tuck is probably a bit different. We have hired rookies, but compared to others, we've probably hired more, non-rookie folks across the school. I think it's important to understand the motive of why the person might be interested in moving. And it's not right or wrong motives, it's just to understand the motives. Some people are moving for personal reasons, so they move for professional reasons. And also some folks move because they want a fresh start. Yeah, in some sense, publication has been slow and they're looking essentially to move to, in some sense, restart the clock. The restarting the clock is always a little bit sort of vague as to what that means. And both of those things, it's pretty fine to be moving to restarting the clock, or fine to be moving because you've actually had a great start. For some reason, you're moving. Sorry, there's a lawnmower outside my office here. I apologize if you can hear that lawnmower. It's very loud for me. So I think then it's helpful, I'd say from our perspective, oftentimes, if people also they might apply to Interfolio, but as I indicated earlier, some folks will reach out to us and say, hey, I might be interested in moving. Can we have a conversation? Can we have a cup of coffee? Jump on Zoom. So I think it's absolutely fine for people, assistant professors, associate professors, to actually make a connection and reach out, especially if they already have some connection with someone in the department.
Thanks, Brian. I think I'm going to let our attendees ask questions now. I have one or two more questions, but I think I would love to hear, our doctoral students who are in the market this year, what information or insights we can provide beyond what we've been talking about. So you can ask questions in the chat, and any panel member can take the questions.
I noticed
I
one
wanted to comment.
Go ahead, Brian.
I noticed one about saying there's not many jobs yet. That might change, but let's say it doesn't change. Also look at postdocs. There are many ways it's a way to actually, get more research done, but also to get visibility among other stakeholders, other potential letter writers. So if there are postdocs, I'd encourage people to also consider postdocs potentially.
I would also like to add, besides postdoc, now companies such as Amazon and Uber, they do hire PhD candidates or fresh PhD to work on a couple of years. And I think that would be a plus, because that's you have more work experience and also in the really exciting industry. And I think that a lot of our new assistant professors, they do work at Uber, Facebook or something before they join the university. So keep that in mind.
That's a great point, Chris. I think back to, I mentioned earlier, I didn't go into industry straight away. I went into a complete non-research job in a consulting company. So it was a little bit difficult for me to come back, to be honest. But nowadays, exactly as Chris says, Uber, Facebook, Amazon, etc., are hiring people to do stuff that's pretty close to sort of research, I would say. And so given the interest of students in analytics, especially, having some experience in a company like that would be seen as a positive. And as Chris indicated, even folks who get jobs oftentimes go for a year. So we hired someone from Columbia last year, Raghav Shingle, and Raghav spent a year at Amazon and started teaching for us next week here. So completely agree with what Chris said there.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to add to that comment earlier about the industry experience and whether that's perceived positively. I do think, well, clearly if it's relevant, as Brian just suggested, you know, if you've got some analytics component or something that you can build on, or access to data or something that gives you kind of a foundation for research, that's fantastic. There is a kind of, I mean, I've seen this happen where if someone has, I mean, experience is almost always valued to a point, but let's say there's someone who's worked in industry for 20 years and Brian, you mentioned consulting, particularly in consulting or something, and then they come back and get a PhD. There is this perception, you know, right or wrong, there can be this perception that someone with that background is maybe going to have a harder time transitioning into a real research role. You know, those of you who maybe, if you've had a chance to teach executives, sometimes they're very set in their understanding of how business works. It's very difficult for them to kind of consider new ways of thinking or to value certain types of research questions. So there's that kind of perception as well. So if you happen to be in that category where you have a lot of years of experience, you know, just make sure that you also communicate this openness to research and communicating a value for research. That you're not, that experience is going to be a real asset for you, not an anchor, if you will.
Anandi, you were going to add something?
No, yeah, a couple of quick points on that, and then I was also going to tackle one new question that's come up about you know, students not having teaching experience. But on the previous one, I would also say, I mean, there's a lot more international schools that are now, you know, research-oriented international schools, and more jobs that I see beyond sort of US-centric schools. So clearly that's another, you know, a lot more opportunities for students that are willing to move outside US for good jobs. That's Asia, Europe, newer schools are cropping up all the time. And many of them are investing quite heavily in building a research infrastructure as well. So the question that I saw popping up was, what if a student does not have teaching experience? You know, how should they handle that? That is not uncommon, especially if you got your PhD from a private university. For example, at Emory, we don't, you know, have a tradition of allowing our PhD students to teach independently full classes. So it is not uncommon for, you know, students to be on the market without having taught many semesters on their own. But we look, when we recruit candidates for jobs, we look for evidence of being a successful teacher in the classroom in a variety of ways. Even if you haven't taught independently, perhaps you have, you know, served as a teaching assistant with another professor, and you may have taught some sessions independently. So document everything that you've done to build up your teaching dossier. And you may not have teaching evaluations, but that doesn't mean you can't have a teaching dossier. Put together what are the classes you feel comfortable teaching. You know, I always tell my doctoral students, have some sort of a skeletal syllabus in mind in terms of what, you know, topics and how you would approach that, your teaching philosophy. Those sorts of things should still go into your teaching statement. And more importantly, when you go in for presentation, I and my colleagues often look for signals of how effective this person is going to be. Even though you're presenting your research, we are also looking to see, hey, will this person be effective in the classroom? Can we put them in front of an MBA audience? Will they be better in front of an undergraduate audience? For example, if they don't have as much industry experience, sometimes we might say, hey, but this is a, you know, fantastic potential. I'm sure in a couple of years, they will really find their, you know, hit their stride with teaching. We can get them started in the undergraduate program first. So all of those calculus kicks in, right? So, if you don't have teaching evaluations, that doesn't mean you can't really aspire to go into a tenure track position. I think I'll stop there on that question. And I know there are more questions coming up.
Thank you, Anandi. I think I see another question that I think is a valid question. What do you consider a strong candidate in terms of number of publications, manuscript under revision, so on and so forth in the pipeline? Who is that ideal candidate? An ideal candidate varies from school to school, what the needs are for that particular position. But give a sense of what is a strong dossier in terms of research, for example, for a new PhD. Brian, I'm going to go with Brian. I was always going with Dr. Tang. You're muted.
Sorry, it's a tough thing to say, Box. It's going to vary by school. I mean, fundamentally, what we try and look for, we're trying to make a projection for years forward as to someone's sort of research, talent, ability, curiosity, productivity, and their sort of teaching potential. I would say a big change in the 20 years since I was in the job market is I had no publications when I was in the job market, I'll be frank. The emphasis put on publications at application time, I wish it wasn't that way, but I think that the market has moved more in that direction. I would say we don't put huge weight in that, to be honest. We're really trying to figure out the long-term potential of somebody. And so the conversations we have in person with people are much more relevant for doing our research projection going forward than the record. That being said, of course, if someone has a good publication, it's going to be helpful. I'm not going to lie about that. And in some schools where there is a 2-year review and the 2-year review has some jeopardy attached to it, most schools it doesn't really have jeopardy, but in schools where a 2-year review has some jeopardy attached to it, then people will probably put even more weight on publications.
Yeah, I would like to add on to Brian's comments. I fully agree. I think that the market has changed. When I was on the market, I had zero. I was zero, even working paper. There's nothing to talk about, right? But time has changed. So right now, because the market is more competitive, because there are more of you now. But I think that is what I observe in our group in particular is that there are two different opinions. I think our junior candidates, they're much more competitive. So they like to see someone has a proven record in terms of publication. So if you don't have any publication, it's fine, but we like to see what is in the pipeline. Paper submitted, or do you get invited for revision? That is a good signal, right? So of course, as Brian said, that if you have something published, they're fantastic, right? But we tend to look at obviously quality over quantity. So in that case, actually, we're not looking for big quantity because that is not believable, right? Now, second one, I want to point out that is, as I said, that you said we had the junior folks to screen out the candidate first, and then the junior, and then everyone will meet. We discuss the shortlisted, and then to try to pick out which one we will recommend to be the finalist for the interview. Now, this is where the differentiation. I think that I personally look at a person whether it's working on an area that has better future. That means for multiple years, rather a dead end topic. Let's say, for example, some of the topic they're so well researched, the chance for you to establish an entire career for the next 5 or 6 years is very small. If you're working on a very rich area that is emerging, then it's hey, there is a potential that's for you to spend for the next 6 years for your 10 o'clock to focus on this area. So in that case, is more likely for you to be successful, because if the switch area from area to area, there is a switching time. Then in the case, you don't have the time because you're fighting against the 10 o'clock, right? So therefore, we do look into that. Are you working in a really rich area or dead end area? All all right? Because that is a different element. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
I
Yeah, I
did
would
add? Yeah.
just add one thing. So
Morgan, go ahead.
I think the school that you're coming from and the reputation of the program has a lot more influence than actually the publication. They work together in this way. If you're coming from a really top ranked school, highly recognized, well known for its rigor and training and all that, then if you don't have a publication, it's probably okay. People are going to assume that you've got the requisite skills and capabilities, given that you got through that school. If, on the other hand, you're coming from another school that is not as well known, or maybe is not as perceived to be as methodologically rigorous in training, then a publication does a lot to kind of allay the fear is too strong a word, but the suspicion about weakness or something. So it really matters a lot where you're coming from as to whether or not that publication influences decision makers. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
And having one, top publication, a management science or an MSOM or POMS, right? I have to say POMS, right, Bala?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, it certainly, I think, puts you at the top, and it's hard for schools to overlook a profile or a packet with, one or two strong publications. So that's definitely something which will give you a leg up and an advantage, and more likely than not for you, regardless of which school you are from, I think, having that having those published papers or accepted papers certainly puts you in the top pile. But I would say, I think, and I agree completely with Brian and Professor Tang earlier when they talked about not having a publication doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be considered, right? So it certainly people are looking at the your potential, the quality of your work, how likely is it to lead to strong publications in the future. All of those considerations will kick in.
So another question I see, and we have a lot of international attendees right now, and the question is, do U.S. universities look at international candidates differently than the domestic candidates? Do U.S. universities even look at the international candidates for jobs in the U.S. universities? So again, that varies. I can tell you, many years ago, we wouldn't even look at an international candidate, Texas A&M, many years ago, but that's not the case anymore. We look at this past 2 years, we looked at very strong candidates from schools abroad. We even invited them to visit. So I think at least in our school that has changed. That's a welcome change because there are some fantastic candidates out there around the world. Can you all give a sense of what is it like in your schools? I bet that's the case in your schools as well, because it has evolved. The practice has evolved where we'll tend to go after the best people we can find, whether it's within US or internationally. So
absolutely. Morgan, we have flown people to campus from European schools. In fact, we recruited somebody from INSEAD about 3-4 years ago, I think. We've also flown people from Singapore. So Singapore, Hong Kong, China, India, Europe are all now producing fantastic scholars. So, and I think we will miss out on a great talent pool if we don't look into those applicants. And that's quite an accepted practice now to bring international students and fly them out. And maybe now with Zoom, it becomes even easier if you want to at least do some, use
we did too. We hired somebody from INSEAD. Morgan, what is it like at TCU? You're in Texas.
Yeah, no, we have no restriction on that. The program or school that the candidate is coming from is much, much more important than the nationality or the location, right? And there's great schools and not so great schools in the US and Europe and Asia, everywhere. So that's the important element.
So that means international candidates should not hesitate to apply to positions they think appropriate fit for themselves. So I suspect most universities approach international versus domestic in the same way like we do. So let's see, I have any other questions here. I have a question about sending updates. One thing I noticed last year as I was doing this process, especially when you have 250, there are, updates keep coming in, updates, a resume or a cover letter or papers. Is that a good practice? Is that a good practice to send updates to, once you're in the middle of the process? Professor Tang?
Okay, let me give you a short answer. I think it depends. I think that if the update is minor, maybe you can skip it. Oh, my paper is getting a revision or minor revision is not going to make a difference. But if your CV has a really drastic change, for example, your paper wants a significant award recognition, please do. If you have a special appointment, a special changes, then in the case, do, right? So I think that could help.
Brian?
Yeah, I agree with what Chris said there. I think it also depends at what point in the process. If I move forward to after, let's say, a conference interview, and you've met from the school, it's a nice way to actually stay in touch with the faculty member during the process. If you have a somewhat material significant type of update, update prior to screening, unless it's significant, I wouldn't be doing it.
Another question I see here is the order of authorship in articles. Is that a critical factor? Do search committee even care the order, or search committee is content with seeing a candidate as an article? So I suspect we don't. I mean, I can tell you for sure in Texas A&M, we are happy to see a student on a paper, an MSOM or POMS or ISR. We don't really pay attention to the order, but that might be different for different schools. So if you could touch on that.
Yeah.
I'll take a quick stab out. I don't mean negative when I say this, but people have to realize there's only so much time and bandwidth we have to look at individual applications. So the degree of forensic kind of analysis is probably less than you want it to be, to be honest about that. To me, again, to our group here, it's really about trying to project independence of research. So yeah, if someone's an author on a co-author on a 5 or 6 author paper, it's going to look different than someone's an author on a 2 author paper. But that's after we've really spent time looking at it. I don't think in our first initial screening we're paying attention to that, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think this comes up later, more later when somebody is coming up for tenure, where you look for evidence of independent scholarship. But to the extent that if somebody as a candidate can already demonstrate that, and they are in a 1 or 2, solo or 2 author. Solo is very rare for a PhD student, but a 2 author paper certainly speaks. But I also want to just very quickly point out that these are all changing as well. At least something that it keeps coming up in our discussion in the tenure committee as well. These tend to be discipline specific. It tends to vary in sciences and engineering. It's very common now for multi-authored paper, and that's how they think of science, right? As team-based work. And I think in the business school, we have tended to be much more insular, and we still look for evidence of sole authorship. In fact, I've started to question whether that's really even a good metric anymore that we should be using, because as we keep emphasizing multidisciplinary work and team science and all that, shouldn't our metrics also start changing? But all of this takes time. I think people are still sort of used to thinking about sole authored work and 1 or 2 authored work as superior to multi-authored work. But I do believe that, and I hope actually by the time that you all enter the job market and continue your work, we do tend to have much more cross and interdisciplinary work with larger teams. And
Thank you, Anandi. I see another question that has to do with the quality of journals, how the search committees perceive as they review dossiers. I mean, that's also a question that comes up within schools all the time. You know, what is a top journal, what not? Some schools have lists of top journals, others don't. There was an attempt to have a list here, and we decided against it. So, some thoughts on what journals should our and of course, it depends on the orientation. You know, there's a different orientation, different top journal. But so if you can give some sense of what journals our doctoral students should be aspiring for to publish. Morgan, you want to take that first?
Sure.
I know you're an editor of JOM for a while. So
yeah. Well, if I could just make a quick comment about the prior question too. I do think that if I'm looking at a resume and a candidate has a publication, but they're the third author and the publication has very little connection to the dissertation topic, which is also hopefully described in the resume, I'm going to give that less weight, obviously, than if I see a publication that appears to be foundational or somehow, within the stream, something related to the dissertation. So still great to have a publication, but, there's a lot of adding doctoral students to papers at the last minute kind of activity that we're kind of sensitive to as well. So in terms of journals, I'm not going to tell you what journals to go for. There's no way I would test that.
That's a tricky question. Huh?
You can certainly look at the faculty of the school and see where are they publishing, right? And there are, I think, pretty clearly identifiable differences. Some schools are very empirically oriented. Some are very more OR, traditional, mathematical types of approaches, and some schools are highly mixed. So take a look at where they're publishing, where the faculty are publishing there. And then that's a great question to ask. Just about every interviewee asks that question. If you get to that stage where you get to talk to somebody, that's one of the questions they ask. So, and it does vary across schools.
Professor Tang, is that accurate?
I would have a slightly different spin on this topic. And I think that it's not necessarily for you to only focus on the top journals, because not all papers can be accepted. Sometimes it could be a fit, could be a topic issues, but there should be some aspiration. I think we need to see a candidate has aspiration to do top good quality research. Then how do we know that? Because before you have any paper submitted, accepted, right? So where you submitted the paper has some signal, right? That's point number one. Point number two is that when you come up for promotion later on, most schools will look at the portfolio. Then of course, within the portfolio, you're expected to have some publications in the top journal. If you don't have any, then there's also a problem in the long run. But in the short run, I think that we're looking for your capability, your aspiration, your passion, because we don't have enough information to know exactly your capability. So therefore, your CV, your aspiration, where you submit the papers has captured some of this element. Just keep that in mind.
Brian?
Again, I agree with what Chris said there. And in many ways, it's unlikely to have a solo paper. So where the paper got submitted is more likely to be driven by your advisor, etc. I want to come back to maybe what Morgan said earlier about understanding fit with institutions. In many ways, if you have a particular type of journal you aspire to Chris's point, you'll get a sense of whether you'll be a good fit with the school or not, and look at the faculty where they're publishing. So it's a way to figure out where you're going to be happy. And I know at the moment the key is getting a job. What's really key is getting a job you're going to be happy at, because that's when you'll be successful.
Anandi, you have the last say on that, Anandi.
Yeah.
Just don't publish in ISR.
Right, and I related discipline. So I'm a little bit outside the core OM, but do work both in IS and OM. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, for most of the business schools, even the top 50 to 100 schools, both the UTD list and maybe the FT50 list have kind of become de facto lists. So I've seen people, highlight those journals in their CVs if it's in one or the other of those two lists. So, I mean, and eventually, if you think about how these lists come, they are collectively over time emerged as sort of the consensus opinion of the community in terms of, which journals the folks are publishing in. So I think those are at least good signals. It doesn't mean that you have to send only or aspire to publish only in that list, but having that in mind, I think helps. The only thing I would say is if you have too many sort of, publications in random journals which don't really sort of connect, and it seems like you've just been opportunistically taking every term paper or every thing that you did in your 5 or 6 years and tried to publish it somewhere. And I've heard that advice from some folks, just, every paper you should publish somewhere. I don't subscribe to that theory because I think then there's no coherence in your CV, and it might actually hurt a bit as well, depending on which schools you're applying to. So at the end of the day, I think, the points that were made earlier about have some coherence to who you are, the work you do, and how that relates to the papers that you've written and have tried to publish.
Well, thank you, Anandi. I think I'm going to conclude this. We can hang around here and answer some of the questions on chat, but let me thank our panels, Professor Tang, Morgan Swink, Brian Tomlin, Anandi Bharatwaj. How grateful we are, because I know how busy you are. When I requested you to be on the panel, all of you responded right away. That signals to all of us how important our doctoral students are for us and our profession. So much appreciated, both on behalf of POMS and myself, and all the attendees. Folks, I know it's a stressful time. It's always, we remember going through this process, but keep faith, be optimistic, as Dr. Professor Tang said. Eventually, you will find the right place for you. We have all gone through that, and we agonized over one school over the other. Eventually, we ended up in a place where we were quite happy, all of us. So, good luck to each one of you. And if you have any questions, we will hang around a little bit. You please put it on the chat. Otherwise, we will see you. I will see you the next session, which is on Friday 17th, same time. And also, if you're not a member of POMS, I saw on the list there were a number. If you're not members of POMS, POMS is a very, very good, very generous membership for PhD students. Take advantage of that. I think I would encourage our students to be members of Informs, MSOM, POMS, because that's where the core of our work takes place, and plus some IS areas as well. So, well, thank you all, panel members. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day wherever you are. Brian, enjoy your lawnmower there in the background. Morgan, thank you, Morgan. Professor Tang, Anandi, say hello to Sundar.
Will do.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.